Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to streamline your reading list, get you the core insights, and today, wow, we're taking a really fascinating and frankly pretty chilling journey. We're looking at Hitler's Panzers, getting right into the German armored divisions. We'll trace their evolution, from this bold idea on paper to the Blitzkrieg's edge, and then, well, how it all came apart.
Yeah, and the central question, we really need to tackle this head on.
Yeah.
How did this force, they arguably perfected operational art, revolutionized warfare.
Absolutely, the elite.
The functional elite, yeah. How did they fail so completely in the end? We're going to unpack that paradox.
Yeah.
Where Doctrine met, well, catastrophic hubris and real technical limits.
And to really get the story, we can't just start in 1939 with tanks rolling into Poland. No, we've got to rewind, go back to the trauma, the moment that birthed the whole concept. Picture this. Western Front, September 15th, 1916. Flares on the Somme.
Yeah, it was an absolute shock. German soldiers, they're dug in, trench warfare, rigid system. Then suddenly, out of the shell fire, these things start emerging. Hulking, tracked. They called them unearthly monsters.
Unearthly monsters.
These were the first British tanks. And their appearance just fundamentally shattered German assumptions about ground combat. Everything changed in that moment. Psychologically, at least.
And that shock, that sort of mystique, it really stuck around, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Our sources point out this great bit of propaganda from Cambrai about a year later, this legend of the gunner of Flesquier.
Right, the lone hero myth.
Supposedly took out 5, maybe even 16 British tanks, all by himself.
When the reality was probably, a well-placed field battery doing its job.
Exactly. But the myth took hold. That cemented the tank, this new terrifying monster, as this central figure in German military thinking, something they had to counter, had to understand.
And that strategic answer, it really came out of necessity, didn't it?
Post-World War I, yeah. The Versailles Treaty constraints. Germany couldn't build a massive army.
No mass. So they were forced to innovate. Prussian military thinkers, they had to develop this higher operational level of war. It became all about speed, daring, Krieg, a war of movement.
And this is where that trauma starts turning into actual doctrine, thanks largely to Hans von Seeckt, head of the Reichswehr, the Weimar Army. His mandate was clear. Quick, decisive victories. Imagine you're an officer trained in slow, grinding warfare, and Seeckt comes along and says, basically, mass becomes immobile. It cannot win victories. It can only crush by sheer weight. He's throwing out the old playbook.
A total shock to the system, I bet. His goal was crystal clear. Build an army that could fight outnumbered and win. His 1921 manuals, they laid the groundwork. It was all about the offensive. Commanders needed pace, tempo, make decisions fast with limited info, master the encounter battle, flexibility, skill, not just numbers.
And you see the early tank guys, they knew the political game too. Ernst Volkheim, a tank officer from the Great War, he apparently quipped pretty dryly that if tanks weren't promising, then certainly the Allies would not have banned them from the Reichswehr.
Oh. Good point.
He saw the future in medium-weight, gun-armed tanks. Not just slow infantry support, but real striking power.
Which leads us straight to Heinz Guderian. He really championed this intellectual push. And what's really interesting about Guderian is how he taught military history.
Okay.
He didn't focus on, glorious German victories of the past. He obsessed over defeat. He taught how armies failed because they got stuck. Intellectually rigid, failed to innovate.
Wait, hold on. That's fascinating. He taught defeat. How do you spin that into a doctrine for winning for shock tactics?
We basically built a positive doctrine by studying negative examples. He argued that real shock power needed force multiplied by impulsion, by speed, and that could only come from fast, gun-armed tanks punching through, not plodding along with infantry.
Okay, so learning from failure to design success.
Exactly. And they weren't dreaming this up in a vacuum either. They were watching everyone else obsessively. British maneuvers, the Vickers medium tank.
Right, and they latched onto specific ideas that really shaped the Blitzkrieg concept, like Sir George Milne's comment.
Oh yeah, that future armored force that could strike, 300 miles deep into enemy territory?
300 miles, that idea of deep penetration, that really resonated.
Definitely. So by the mid-20s, tanks weren't just helpers anymore. Wilhelm High argued they could bring decisive weight to the decisive point. The Schwerpunkt.
But to hit that Schwerpunkt, they needed more than just tanks. They needed a revolution in command.
Ah, yes. This is where the German approach gets really unique, I think. The crucial idea was commanders must be at the front, right at the head of their units. using armored command vehicles, radios,
Right.
maintaining contact, driving the breakthrough personally.
So it wasn't just the tank design, it was realizing command had to be mobile, decentralized, out there on the edge.
Totally rejecting the Great War model. No more generals in rear echelon chateau.
Right, miles behind the lines.
The commander had to see it, make instant calls, keep the momentum going. And you see Rommel embodying this perfectly later on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Developing that mobile HQ in a fast vehicle, an electronic command center on wheels, basically. Always pushing ahead.
Okay, so all this theory, this doctrine, it culminates in 1939. Case White, Poland.
Yep, the plan was pure Bewegungskrieg. A breakthrough, then a double envelopment. Schlieffen-esque, but with tanks.
And it worked incredibly fast. But even then, the post-campaign analysis showed some cracks, right?
Yeah, critiques emerged. The tanks often outran their artillery support,
Right.
and sometimes the specialized infantry lacked, well, aggressiveness. They'd wait for the tanks or the Stukas to solve problems instead of exploiting openings themselves.
Interesting. So seeds of coordination issues already.
Potentially. But then came 1940. The Western Campaign. That was the ultimate performance. Manstein's Sichelschnitt plan. The sickle cut through the Ardennes.
Which everyone thought was impassable for tanks.
Exactly. He completely bypassed the Maginot Line logic. The speed, the Panzers driving deep behind Allied lines. It was overwhelming.
But that very speed, that incredible success, it caused nervousness at the top, didn't it? Leading to the halt order at Dunkirk.
May 24th. A critical moment. Hitler, maybe getting nervous about his own rapid success, worried about a counterattack.
Yeah.
He steps in. He asserts authority directly in the operational sphere.
Overruling the generals on the ground.
Precisely. And that's a sign of the strategic hubris creeping in. Political leadership overriding military expertise.
Sure.
A crack that just gets wider as the war goes on.
But in the short term, the result was this Blitzkrieg mystique. Convincing everyone, friend and foe, that resistance was basically pointless. Not merely futile, but pathetic, as our source puts it.
Yeah, and that psychological impact immediately got tangled up with Nazi ideology. Victory was framed in terms of racial superiority, German destiny.
And we have to touch on the darker side that ran alongside that victory. The sources are clear about this.
Yes. The 1940 campaign saw disturbing incidents, particularly the treatment of French West African troops.
Yeah.
Refusal of quarter, brutal executions.
Explicitly justified on racial grounds.
Yeah. While it might have been localized then, it signals this developing core issue within the Wehrmacht culture, this idea of exterminatory warfare, justifying ruthlessness through ideology, dehumanizing the enemy.
Feeling foreshadowing. Which brings us east. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia.
Described as an inverted pyramid, wasn't it? With the Panzers right at the pointy tip.
Yeah, a massive gamble. The bank, the source calls it. All or nothing.
And the Soviets. The scale they potentially had was just staggering. Maybe 29 mechanized corps, each theoretically with like 1,000 tanks.
Huge numbers.
Massive potential. But crippled, really, by poor coordination, lack of radios, and crucially, Stalin's earlier purges.
Yeah.
He'd eliminated their best mobile warfare thinkers, people like Tukhachevsky.
So they had the mass, but not the doctrine or leadership to use it effectively, at least not initially.
Right. Which played right into German hands in 41. But by 43, things change. We get to Kursk.
The climax. The biggest tank battle in history. Guderian apparently pleaded with Hitler, wait for the new tanks, the Panthers, the Tigers.
But Hitler pushed ahead.
Yeah.
And the battlefield itself, the geography around Kursk,
Yeah.
it was too confined. It neutralized the Panzer's main strengths.
Yeah.
Maneuver, speed.
So the ultimate maneuver force gets stuck in a slugfest.
Exactly. The moment Kursk turned into pure attrition, the paradox was complete. The German way of war, designed to avoid attrition, was defeated by it. Look at Prokhorovka, that famous clash, often pictured as this giant collision of thousands of tanks.
Right.
But the reality, at least initially, Rotmistrov's big Soviet counterattack ran headlong into just 2 German panzer companies from 1 SS division.
2 companies against a massive wave.
Yeah. No, the German tanks, the newer ones especially, were often qualitatively better. German losses on that specific day, July 12th, for that 1 SS division were incredibly low. Maybe only 3 total write-offs.
But the Soviets?
They took horrific losses there. Over 300 tanks and assault guns just to Prokhorovka. Thousands more across the wider salient. Materially, it was costly for them.
But strategically?
Strategically and symbolically, Kursk was decisive. The Soviets stopped the biggest German armored thrust ever. And they learned. They didn't necessarily try to copy the German Auftragstaktik, that mission-based command relying on brilliant, junior leaders.
What did they prioritize instead?
Control. That's the key word our source uses. Control.
Explain that difference for us. Control versus mission-based.
Okay, so the German approach, Auftragstaktik, needs highly trained, adaptable leaders taking initiative, often out of contact. It works brilliantly under the right conditions against a disorganized enemy. The Soviet control approach was built for industrial-scale warfare. Think density, redundancy, managing huge amounts of material, centralized command, overwhelming numbers. It prioritized reliable systems over individual brilliance.
So less elegant, maybe, but more robust for the chaos of the Eastern Front.
Exactly. In that environment, where conditions weren't perfect, where comms failed, where sheer mass mattered, the Soviet system, focusing on control and density, proved more survivable, more sustainable. It ground the Germans down.
Which brings us to the endgame, 1944, 1945. The Panzer divisions are shadows of their former selves.
Yeah, the divisions that broke France in weeks. Now they're fragments. They become, as the source says, a kind of security blanket for an infantry, fighting a corporal's war.
A corporal's war.
Yeah, meaning lots of small piecemeal fights, constantly plugging gaps, relying on dwindling quality against just overwhelming quantity. It's an endgame of exhaustion, retreat.
So we started with this paradox, this brilliant, elite, revolutionary force that ultimately failed. It's more than just tanks and battles, isn't it? It's about a mindset.
It really is. The source describes the Panzers as a technocracy, defined not just by the machines, but by a mentality of operational excellence above all else. They were constantly given impossible tasks by Hitler and the high command, tasks beyond their actual means. And their response was to double down on operational skill, on tactical brilliance.
And that focus, that skill, became an analgesic, the source calls it.
An analgesic, a painkiller. It's a chilling idea.
Meaning they got so good at the how of fighting, they stopped asking about the why.
Precisely. That intense focus on operational proficiency, on just doing the job incredibly well, it allowed leaders, maybe the whole institution, to avoid really grappling with the moral implications, the horrific objectives they were serving. The final judgment, our source, is stark. It captures this contradiction. Brilliant soldiers, innovative doctrine, and yet never did men fight better in a worse cause.
That's a heavy thought to end on. Skill versus morality. And it leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final question to think about, maybe. Tying back to that idea of the analgesic, in any highly specialized, high-performing group, military, maybe corporate, tech, whatever, how easily can that focus on operational brilliance, on just being good at the task, become the highest virtue, allowing people, leaders, participants to maybe ignore the bigger ethical picture of what they're actually doing?
Something worth reflecting on, maybe, the next time you hear about any group that prides itself purely on its elite efficiency.
Indeed. Thank you for diving deep with us today.